Hello and welcome. My name is Troy Dexter and I'm a professional guitar player here in Los Angeles, California, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Fender Telecaster guitar, which I just love. Throughout the tape I'm going to show you its many features and show you how you can apply some of its many wonderful sounds to different styles of music. The thing I love about it is that whether you're in a recording or a band situation, it always seems to find a magical home. I have several guitars, and I never leave the house without one of these.
The variety of sounds you can get with the Fender, you know. That's why you see a lot of other guitar companies go under, because they'll market specifically for one market, while Fender quality is so dynamic that it can be used in country, it can be used in heavy metal, it can be used in just straight rock and roll, and a lot of other sounds. It's a very versatile guitar, and that's important in the Fender quality.
To me, the Telecaster is sort of synonymous with a bright sound. And there's lots of string bending and lots of real aggressive rhythm playing where the strings kind of slap against the neck and you play and you go for it. I recommend using a light or an extra light gauge string, and that would be starting with a .009 as the high E string or a .008. Now, your local music store can help you pick out the right gauge string if you're not already familiar with string gauges. The reason that you want to use light gauge strings is to make string bending a lot easier. In this case, the B string gets right up to pitch, like so. Now let's talk about some of the features of the guitar. The typical Telecaster has two single coil pickups, one here and one here, and then you have a 3-position switch that switches between the pickups, or if it's in the middle, you get both. Now let me demonstrate the sound. This is pointing now at the bridge pickup, and this is what it sounds like. Real bright, almost kind of abrasive sort of sound. Now this sounds a little sweeter. This is both pickups together. It's also terrific for rhythm. And this is one of my favorites, the neck pickup. Put the switch like that, pointing towards it. And this is what this sounds like. Let's talk about these two knobs here. This front one is for volume. And the rear one is for tone. That's all the way open. It's the most trebly. And if I roll it off, it's a mellow sound. And you can put it anywhere in between. And last but not least, let's talk about the bridge. Now I chose this particular guitar because each string has an individual saddle. And this part of the guitar is for adjusting the string height and intonation. Now on a lot of Telecasters, especially old ones, two strings will share one bridge piece here, one saddle. But I find that I can fine-tune it better if each one has its own. And again, that's just for adjusting the string height and the intonation. And if you're not experienced in intonating your own guitar, then your local music store can help you find somebody to do that. Now before we get started, let's get tuned up. Here's a high E. Now the B string. Now G. Here's D. Now the A string. And finally low E. To help demonstrate what the guitar can do, I'll emulate some styles and licks from some well-known Telecaster players. Let's start with Danny Gatton. Danny was a Nashville session ace, and when I think of his sound, a couple things come to mind. I think of using the bridge pickup and playing a bass line kind of like this. Or I'll think of kind of blues rock oriented, but still country, like blistering lead playing, like so. And I'm using a little bit of effect to enhance the sound. I'm using a kind of like a slap delay, like so. Now here's another example with the whole band. Now we'll play the same sort of example, and this time I'll use the switch in the middle position, and that's both pickups together. And it's sort of a sweeter sound. Here we go. Now let me show you how to get some of these sounds. The bass line that I was doing, a big part of getting that sound is resting this part of my right hand on the strings that I'm playing and kind of muting them. I play it like this. I'll play it real slow. Now I'll talk about some of the lead stuff that was a little higher register. I use a couple of different techniques, and some of these techniques are shared by other players that I'll talk about later in the tape. I think the first lick that I played up high was two strings at once, the high E and the high B, and I just played them and kind of gave it some vibrato like so. I'm using lots of bends and pull-offs and hammer-ons and those kind of things. I'll do an example. Here's another example. Another technique that I use is using the G string and the B string, playing them together in a coupling, like so. And if I remember the example right, I also muted with my right hand. And sometimes I'll stagger the attacks. Now notice in my right hand I'm using my first finger and my thumb, and then I'm picking the other string with my second finger. First finger and thumb pick the G string. And then if there's a chord that has 3 notes in it, I'll use my second and third finger, like so. Now I'll play some examples using the 2 pickups together. And like I said before, you get kind of a sweeter sound that way. The next guitar player I'd like to talk about is Albert Collins. Great blues player. Some of my favorite records of his were made in the 60s. And he's unique in that when I think of him, I think about a sound achieved with the Telecaster using a double coil or a humbucking pickup in the neck position. And that gets typically a sound that has a little more sustain, a little warmer, and definitely more powerful. And to demonstrate this, I'm adding a little distortion and a little bit of reverb from the amplifier that I'm using, like so. This would be a good time to mention that I'm using a Fender twin reverb amplifier, and it's a fantastic match when playing a Telecaster. It's a real bright sounding amp, real punchy, real powerful, and when playing a lot of these kind of styles, that's definitely what you want. One of my favorite things about the way that Albert Collins plays is that he's a very thematic player. He plays very sparsely and makes short, sort of important phrases. He'll make a statement and then kind of repeat it, embellishing it a little bit. And he doesn't just play constant flurry of notes all the time. He really breathes, and that demonstrates a lot of maturity, I think. Here's an example. Another thing that I love about his playing is that he'll take a rhythm pattern down in the low register and play it with this thick sound that you get from the humbucker in the neck position. That kind of playing works best if you're the only guitar player in the band, so it doesn't sound cluttered. Now here's some of the examples I played earlier, and I'll play them slow. And I'll mention also that part of Albert Collins' style is a real fast vibrato. Here's an example. You hear some other string noise, but it kind of goes with the style. Another great Telecaster user is Andy Summers from The Police. And a couple of unique features about his playing. A lot of times he uses chorusing effect. This is without. This is with chorus. Spatial enhancing sort of effect. Definitely uses a lot of delay. And this time the delay is set for a longer time, probably around 200 milliseconds or so. And in a lot of Police songs, in the chords, there's a lot of add nines or seconds. Like in this case, it's an A add 9. There's a G add 9. There's an E minor 9. To learn more about that, you can buy one of many guitar chord books that you can obtain at your local music store. There's several of them out there, and most of them will fit in your back pocket. All right, so here's some examples. I should mention that in that example, again, I was using my right hand to mute the bass strings. Like so. All right, in the next example, I'm going to play the guitar kind of more like an acoustic guitar with big wide open strums. And here we go. that particular example, I started off by muting, and then I would gradually unmute and play more strings with each strum. And here it is slow. Here it is in tempo again. I'll mention also that in all of these examples, I'm using the combination of the bridge pickup and the neck pickup together. It's a real bright sound. Needless to say, that was in the style of Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. A couple points about his playing. In that particular example, I tuned my guitar to an open G tuning. And I'll run through that real quick. The E string goes down to a D. The B remains the same. G remains the same. D is the same. The A string goes down to a G, and the E string goes down to a D. And what's wonderful about this tuning is that you could just hold your finger straight across and get a nice chord. In that case, a D chord. And then when I hammer on these notes here, I get a nice G add 9. Very typical of a lot of Rolling Stones songs. A couple more points about that particular example. A lot of times Keith Richards will take off his low E string so that he can really strum hard and not risk an open string or something in the wrong key and just use it as a 5 string. He'll also put the capo on in different places to play in different keys and so forth, and I recommend experimenting with that. It's a wonderful sound. To get the sound I'm using in the previous example there, I'm using the humbucker pickup, but if you have a Telecaster with a single coil neck pickup, that'll work just great as well. I'm using a little distortion and a little bit of delay, kind of medium length. This particular tuning is also terrific for playing slide. In this next example, is a style of playing that I learned from Don Felder from the Eagles, although it's used by many. And it involves using 2-string couplings. And I'm using the neck pickup, single coil, and I really like this style of playing a lot. And here we go. That last example is in the style of an R&B ballad. What I played was probably too much to be in a song with lyrics, but some of those ideas work great as like answers to a singer. And I'll play some of the examples slow. Again, like I said, I'm using the two-string couplings and using my thumb and first finger to pick the G string and my second finger to pluck the high E string. Here's another way doing staggered attacks. And then I used a lot of double stops with adjacent strings, this example using the high E and the B string, and hammering them with my first finger of my left hand and doing some slides. And then the next two strings, the B string and the G string, sliding like so. You'll find which fingering is most comfortable for you as you experiment with this style. In that example, that's the way that Albert Lee would play, a very famous Telecaster player. I started off the example, again, muting the bass strings with my right hand. And as you can hear, I have a little bit of a fast delay. I'm using the bridge pickup to get a real bright sound, real strong attack. Lots of ghost notes. A little bit of bending. And also in this example, I'm making use of open strings whenever possible. I'll do another Albert Lee example, and this one isn't so blistering fast or anything like that, but this is some of my favorite playing that he does. It's very slow and lyrical, almost like a steel guitar. In that example, I did a lot of string bending while holding one string down, bending the other. Gives a real steel guitar effect. One very interesting thing right here, on the A chord, I have to bend the G string with my first finger and pull it, which is very unusual. Most of the time you bend by pushing it up, like so, but this time you pull. Gives a nice steel guitar effect. In the next part of the example, I learned kind of a neat thing from Albert Lee. I'm watching him. He'll take advantage of open strings whenever he can, like I said, and the lick on the E chord, I picked both of the high E string and leave it ring, and the low E string and leave it ring as well. and then I bend the D string, which is on the 6th fret, a G sharp note. Here's what it sounds like in context. Another great way to achieve steel guitar effects is with a volume pedal. By getting rid of the attack of the notes, you swell it in. The volume pedal technique takes a little practice, but it's a lot of fun and it's a great sound, and when I do that in a recording session, everyone in the room, their ears kind of perk up. It's a real attention-grabbing sort of sound that everybody likes. Sounds great in a track. The next player I want to talk about is Steve Cropper. Very famous rhythm and blues guitar player, millions of records in the 60s and 70s, and is currently working with the Blues Brothers, among many others. And when I think of him, I think of a couple of different concepts. One is using the bridge pickup to get a real bright rhythm sound, and playing triads, just the top 3 strings, major and minor chords. And starting off by kind of just marrying those chords to the snare drum in the band on like beats 2 and 4, and then also embellishing from there. Here's an example. Now that was playing backbeats with the snare drum, and this time I'll embellish on that and add a little bit more to it. And notice also that on the F chord, there's the C, now here's the F. I use different inversions. One time I'll go here, and one time I'll go here. And in the last example, I pretty much used all upstrokes. 1, 3. 1, 3, like so. This time I'll embellish. Are we ready? In that last example, I used a lot of muting of the strings. Muting with my left hand and continuing a 16th note pattern with my right hand. And that particular technique has been used for the last few decades from the Doobie Brothers and groups like that. Very, very common R&B technique. The next player I'd like to talk about is Jerry Donahue, very well-known Telecaster player as well. He's in a group now called the Helicasters, and for this I'm going to use both pickups. And what I like about his playing, of course he's a blistering fast picker, but what I love about his playing are the slower things, and he kind of gets a very rolling and cascading legato sounds where strings are ringing into each other and that sort of thing. And here's one example that's kind of like a banjo technique, where I'll be picking with my second and third fingers of my right hand. And it might sound something like this. Also sounds really good when it's played fast. Here's another thing I learned from him. It's hard to describe, but it's kind of like a cascading harp sort of run. Here it is one more time. Another neat trick I learned from him was taking the two-string couplings. I'm playing the G string and the E string, and I'll walk them up. And right here, I'll bend both of the strings, which is kind of tricky because you have to bend the G string a whole step and bend the E string a half step. That one takes a lot of practice, but it's a great sounding lick. Next, I'd like to talk about James Burton. James was Elvis Presley's guitar player forever, among countless others. And he did a great thing when he played. He was always conscious of the song and never stepping on the vocal. And he always came up with these interesting parts that just sort of repeated themselves over and over and became part of the song. Here's an example. In the last example, I used real heavy picking on the low strings, real aggressive, all downstrokes. And to get the sound, I'm using just a little bit of distortion. Now I'll do an example of James's rhythm playing, and again, it's magic how he comes up with a part that just kind of disappears and becomes part of the song. And here we go. On that last example, I used my bridge pickup. I'm kind of keeping my right hand just constant and then only pressing down the strings with my left hand, lifting my left hand up to mute the dead notes. And I'll play it slow. Another terrific young player on the scene right now is Johnny Lang, and I kind of associate his sound with a neck pickup sound, real thick saturated distortion, and real soulful vibrato. Here's an example playing a groove. The chords are A minor to D, and here we go. Johnny Lang's style is reminiscent of a lot of great blues players because, again, he breathes and makes real important statements and plays with a lot of soul. One of the techniques that I'll mention now that I didn't earlier was, for example, when you're playing the G string and holding the note, instead of just playing like that, I'll play all 6 strings and deaden the ones that I'm not playing. Gives a more percussive sound. For the final example, I'd like to do a little of what I call singer-songwriter rhythm guitar. And you'll see Bruce Springsteen doing this, Sheryl Crow, the Wallflowers, Counting Crows, oftentimes a lead singer of a band who plays rhythm behind a lead player or whatever will strum in this way. And it's basically just playing the Telecaster like an acoustic guitar, big wide open chords. Real aggressive and not timid at all, usually playing all 6 strings and so forth. For this example, I'm going to leave a little bit of distortion on to keep it from sounding country, and I'm going to definitely use my bridge pickup. And here we go. As you can see, the Telecaster really covers well a multitude of styles of music. And the examples I've shown on this tape really only touch the tip of the iceberg of what it can really do. And as you go on your journey with your Telecaster, I'm sure you will find more sounds that accommodate your own style of music, and I wish you the best of luck with it. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.